Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Too Many Hobbies podcast presented by 𝐤𝐤𝐤. I'm your host, Brian Elthorpe. Today, we have my buddy Eric Lance on. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian. How you doing? Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. So we were kind of going back and forth on, we've gone back and forth for a while on just camera stuff and just talking about hunting. But the other day, you were reaching out to me about that Great Lakes mallard study that I was probably talking out of my ass on, which is fine. That's what I do. But I figured it'd be cool to have you on and kind of go through, like, I know you do a bunch of cool projects in our area and you study a lot of the mallard habitat and stuff like that. So just wanted to talk about that. But to get everybody up to speed on who you are and what you do, why don't you give us a little background of kind of how you started out?
Yeah, so I've been a wildlife biologist for about 20 years. My entire time has been in the private sector, so I don't work for a state agency or anything like that. I don't think I ever could, to be honest with you. But everything's been the private sector. I've also taught at the university for about 8 years, Kent State University. I teach in the Department of Biological Sciences over there in just a bunch of different classes. It's kind of on an as-needed basis. I'm not a full-time faculty there. But I would say probably the first, maybe half of my career was really more focused on, large mammal ecology. Like, deer was something still am, interested in, but that consumed me, and turkeys too, predators. I mean, just kind of all those different types of things. But I also do, as a consultant, I also do a lot of permitting and things like for endangered species and things. So what I do for work is very diverse. I don't solely focus on wildlife. I mean, a vast majority of what I do is wildlife, but the other aspect deals with the non fun stuff that people don't realize that goes on. It's all the paperwork. It's why I've got 3 screens here, because there's about 8 different things I'm looking at one time on permit applications and things like that. So not the glamorous field work that people see. I would say probably about 10 years ago, I really, when I got into duck hunting ish, maybe not quite that long ago, but ducks really shifted my focus. And honestly will probably be my focus for the rest of my career. Just like you find that one thing that just connects, it's just like, this is never going anywhere. So I would say, but I will say the last, 8 years or so have really been more focused on ducks and working with them. So, but kind of paralleling with that too, I've worked with wetlands my entire career. I'm a wetland ecologist as well. So, that's really what stemmed. I've always had an interest in ducks, but, you've seen the evolution of how things go, and the deer world dominated. I did private land management for landowners and stuff when I had my own consulting company for a while. So that just dominated my early part of my career when I was younger. But then you get older and your priorities change and your interests, you really realize where they were. And now it's really nice because I can blend what I do as a wetland ecologist with waterfowl too. So yeah, it's been a long and interesting career, and I look forward to the rest of it for sure.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously all of our wildlife mesh, especially here, because there's just, in Ohio, we've got like a vast majority, such a diverse amount of wildlife that it's like they all share the same areas. So I'm sure that overlaps quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you started getting into like the biology portion, like going to college and stuff for it, was that derived from like deer and turkeys then?
No. So I didn't grow up in a hunting family. I fished. My dad was a big athlete. I was a big athlete. I played college baseball. I played all sports in high school, and that dominated my youth. Really, sports did. But I'm not old by any stretch, but I'm not young either. I'm 42. But that generation that we still played outside, and I always had an interest in wildlife. I don't know if you remember the old Sunday morning, nature documentaries, the old Marty Stauffer, documentaries. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but those who remember, and I always had subscriptions to zoo books. And back when, the people actually went to libraries, I would go rent animal books and dinosaur books. I just always had an interest in it. And going through high school, I really had an interest in biology. Couldn't really care about less about the other sciences, but biology I really liked because I had an interest in animals, but I also had an interest in medicine, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I was going to be a doctor, but went to college, went to undergrad, and part of your undergrad, you take different classes, and things. And in my introductory biology classes, we're looking at certain aspects of it. And, I just started kind of thinking, about this idea of being a veterinarian, was kind of what I, was really pursuing. I was like, man, this is the best of both worlds. I can go be a wildlife veterinarian for a state park or a state somewhere, and kind of blend the two things I really like, medicine and biology. Well, that was the plan, and then so probably I would say my sophomore year of college, my roommate from the baseball team was a big hunter, and I had never hunted before, and I would go out and help him set up his tree stands, and he was a big turkey hunter, and that's what really got me into it. And you're taking biology classes, and you start learning about conservation and how hunting plays a role. We were at that point of our undergraduate training where you're getting into those upper division classes, those special topic classes. And I had a professor that was a big mentor of mine, that had everything be real hands on. All of our classes, like my forestry classes and stuff, were outdoors, looking how to ID trees and develop these small management plans. Like it wasn't, here's a 50 question multiple choice test. Like it was real, practical knowledge sets. That was really appealing to me. And, he was a retired NRCS, conservationist. And he's like, listen, I think you should pursue, I know you want to do this, but you should pursue this, you know, wildlife instead of this. And I was like, started looking into it, volunteered, started doing some volunteers for a local ecological company, that I ultimately went to work for after college, after undergrad. And yeah, have been doing it ever since, haven't looked back. And I realized that I would rather work with animals at the wild capacity and on the conservation level than dealing with your chihuahua that's got diarrhea, needs vaccines. And, like there was aspects of veterinary medicine that I loved. And I worked as a veterinary assistant slash technician for about 8 years. That's where I met my wife. I met, actually most of through undergrad and even a little bit after undergrad, just because I like doing it, and I had some friends of mine that were the vets there, and I just, stayed and it just helped out. So it's been great, especially now, like, working with birds and pulling blood and sampling and stuff. Like I was with Phil down in Arizona, and, we were pulling blood on the bird, and I was just, give me the needle. I'm used to pulling blood on like kittens, putting IVs in. I'm like, this is nothing, type of thing. So it's definitely helped me, in some aspect. But I'm really happy with the career path that I chose because I enjoy working outdoors with animals in real time in their habitats, and the conservation side is far more rewarding to me than, like I said, working inside of a clinic.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot more benefit to being outside than being stuck in a
Oh, for sure. For your
office all the
sanity
time.
too. Yeah.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that because I grew up. I didn't grow up in a hunting family. I fished. You know, basically the same thing that you just said. I played sports all the way through. I did competitive powerlifting in college. Like I did kind of the same thing. Like I had a roommate that his dad was. I've talked about this before, but he was a carver for hardcore decoys, and so we would get a bunch of decoys, all the time, and he would we used them as like decorations on our house because we had so many of them. And then one day we were like, let's just go out and duck hunt. My roommate hadn't been like by himself duck hunting before, so he's like, I've always gone with my dad. Let's just get our stuff and we'll just go. And so I went and bought some waders. I already had a gun. Like we went, and ever since then, it's just like kind of how you're saying, like when you started duck hunting and then you got into the bird side of it, like you're hooked now. That's just what duck hunting does. Like anybody I've ever talked to that deer hunts or whatever, they get into duck hunting and it's just like everything else goes out the window.
Yeah. It's either you're a bird hunter or you're like not a bird hunter. I mean,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
just like I love deer hunting. I love elk hunting. I love hunting. But if you gave me a choice, I mean, when I was on my elk hunt in November, my buddies they strictly told me, do not, you're not bringing a shotgun, because I was like, I'll buy the licenses there. Like, I'll duck hunt. You guys have fun. And we found bodies of water where they were riddled with birds. I was like, I'll go to the store. I'll buy a layout blind right now. I'm like, you guys call me when you guys shoot an elk. Like, I'm coming out here and, shooting birds, and
To find a way.
Miriam's were out there. And I'm just like, oh my God, they're just out there, they're right there, man. So you're looking at it. But it's funny you mentioned the carving. So I've got some, you really can't see them from here. So my grandma has been a lifelong wood carver, and she's always loved animals too. And her specialty is birds. I told her, so I started taking her a few years ago to the duck carvers convention over here in Independence, Ohio, that they have every year. I was like, a buddy of mine invited me to go up there, and I was like, this is like, these are cool. I started looking around these carvings. I'm like, I seen my grandma. I actually bought one. I buy one every time I go up there. And I told my grandma, like, you missed your calling. I'm like, because your carvings are so much better than these. Like, I was like, you know what I paid for this one? And she's like, what? And I was like, I told her what it was. And she's like, oh my Lord. You know how an old grandma would be like, oh, we just like, I'm like, yeah, like you missed an opportunity, man. But I've got a bunch of them. When I graduated from graduate school, my grandma, we were just in conversation. I was getting ready to graduate in not too long, and she's just, we're talking about ducks, and she's like, "What's your favorite duck?" And I was, probably still true now to the degree, but I was like, my favorite duck's probably Drake wood duck. Just obviously they're just beautiful ducks, and just kind of mentioned in passing. Well, when I graduated, she gives me like a bag, a present bag, you can buy. And I like, grab my God, it's a little heavy. Pull it out. She carved me a life size, Drake wood duck, and painted it. And it had all the feathers or wood burned in, like whole 9 yards.
Well, that's so cool.
I don't have it. It's at my house, but I use them for decorations at my house too. So I'm in a war with my aunt right now, because my grandma is in her mid 90s, and she has kind of hung up carving the last couple of years. But I'm in a war with my aunt right now, who has most of the birds. I'm like, I'm just gonna kick your front door in and just take it, like. So there's a war right now going on between me and my family, because she's carved many other things. All the women in the family, every Christmas, my grandma carves all of them one special like ornament. Like, my wife and my daughters, we have this tree of just all the ornaments that my grandma has carved, for my wife over the last 20 years. And my mom and my sister have them for the last 40 years, like all that stuff. So it's like, listen, you guys got that. It's cool. Like, it's great to have around, but I will have these birds. Like, I've got a chickadee up here. I've got a quail over here. I've got a couple other things in here too. There's a loon up here that she did, which those are trash birds. Whatever. So it's like, I'm like, but it looks cool. But there's a gull up there too. So she's carved different ones. But it's funny you mentioned that, because I grew up with her going to like these wood carving conventions, and like seeing, probably people that were also duck carvers, decoy carvers, that were also doing this too. So it's funny how that world comes in. You don't hear it very often.
No, and there is a group like it's the same group of people that go to the independent show, but like it's those same people will go in to do in like these different competitions for shorebirds and stuff like that also carve decoys. And yeah, I did a podcast with Luke Costello last year, and he was telling me about that. And then I was actually at his house, and he was showing me all these different carvings he's done on like shorebirds and that sort of stuff that's outside of the duck stuff that he does full time. But yeah, it's crazy to like you mentioned that show in Ohio having just like such a deep rooted decoy carving tradition here.
Yeah.
And it's funny that like, even you saying your grandma carved, it's like there's no end to who's going to be carving or what they're doing.
Yeah.
That suits
For the past couple of years since I've been going, I've been trying to get my grandma to go up to that show. And every year, I mean, something comes up with her health or something. She just can't go. Well, this past year, 25 was her first year. I took her up there. I'm pushing her around in her wheelchair. I was like, I told you, I'm like, look at this. I'm like, you could have had a table. You could have had a table right here. I'm like, that's $400 that thing. I'm like, and she just, but it was cool because, I kind of parked her wheelchair over by this wood carving guy. He had all these little tools, and she's looking through, like, I need a new wood burning head, and or whatever it was, like a little tip. And she's like looking, trying to get her purse. I'm like, Grandma, like, I got it, and she's just like, I was like, anything else? I bought her some stuff, and she's just like, oh, you have to do. I'm like, it's just like seeing her, like, it just kind of comes full circle. Like, I'm taking her to the show now, and but that guy was an older guy too, and those wood carving tables like that, there's not very many people that are going there. So here she comes over there, she just blabbing his ear off. I'm like, I got you, dude. Like, I just kind of wheel her away. I'm like, she'll wander a little bit, but yeah,
that guy was probably pumped about it. Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, it's not a younger person's thing anymore to be doing decoy carving. Like, I feel like it's the people that are doing it are kind of spread out throughout the country. Whereas opposed to like the group of people that you see at the independent show are all older people that grew up together.
There's no one doing it under 50. Yeah.
It's like one or two people.
Yeah,
it's like, everybody else.
That show is going to be in trouble in about another 20 years, type of thing. Yeah. There's just not a lot of people doing it. Yeah,
it'd be one of those things where you'd have to advertise it as like kind of like the Easton show, where it's like people are coming out there for the world championship.
There's quite a few painters up there. Some of the girls up there, the artists up there, the painting. I'm like, good God! I bought a couple of those. I got a picture. I bought a print of a blue-winged teal that she printed. I was like, good Lord! I'm like, that's. Yeah, and I had thought, I was like, I'm going to have this moment. My kids, I got a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old. So in a couple of years, they're going to be off to college. I'm like, what am I going to do with myself? I got to find another hobby. And I was like, I had thought about, my grandma was kind of getting rid of all of her wood carving stuff. And I was like, God, maybe I'd get into it. But I remember when I was younger, I tried getting into the carving a little bit. I carved like two manatees, like two little manatees, the easiest thing you could carve. And I was like, this isn't for me. My cousin took it by the horns, and he really got into it when he was younger. But he actually bought a lot of her stuff when, he bought it off of her, give her some extra cash. And I think he'll probably pick it back up, and he was good at it. It's a mental thing for me. I'm like, it's like a pipe dream. Like, that'd be cool. It's a nostalgic thing to like sit in your garage and like just sit there and carve in a decoy. I'm like, I'd have 30 of them that were like not even a third or a quarter done. I'd have this idea, and then my ADHD brain would just pop around the corner, and I'd be starting 4 other things. And my wife's like, no way.
Same thing. So like, I've got this little canvas back right here on the shelf behind me.
Yep, I see it.
That was the first one that I like actually finished. Like, I did it, and it's with like that pink foam. Like, I just carved it on that, and then I wrestle coated it. And I was like, oh, I can do this. And I started making a bunch of other bodies, and it was the same thing. It's like ADHD took over. If one of them turned out bad, I tossed it to the side.
Yeah.
And I was like, yep, I'm done.
I think if I was going to do anything, I would learn how to mount my own birds, even if they weren't like great. Yeah. Like, be like, I'm just going to have mounts all over my house of different things. Yeah. Like, my wife, she's like, there is no way that you would have the patience to do that. She's like, there'd be feathers out of a line. Like, there's just no way. Yeah. I'm like, you've been with me long enough, you know me. So
plus I've heard it smells.
Yeah, she's a dream killer, but it's all right.
Shutting it all down for you.
She just laughed. She's like, there is no way. She goes, if the TV remote doesn't work in 30 seconds, you've thrown it across the room, let alone you trying to mount a bird. She's like, some person or a bird that you just put holes in. Like, she's like, there's no way.
Giant turkeys hanging around in the living room. And you're like, I got to try and mount these. And they just take
She used to joke around. She's like, there's no way you could have been a veterinarian. She's like, you'd be 2 hours into a surgery and be like, well, this is over.
Can't figure this one out. Sorry.
Yeah. Like, this isn't savable. Anyway.
Yeah. So going back to the duck stuff. So if, do you have any like specific projects or anything that you've done that really like set set the tone for what you were going to start
Um,
doing with the birds?
so projects that I've actually spearheaded as far as research projects, no. So I really have, like I said, I've been a practicing, biologist for the last 20 years, more of a field guy. So, I've helped with a bunch of research projects over the years, capturing animals, whether it's, deer or predators or, birds, turkeys, that kind of thing. But research was never really like a big thing for me. Um, really until I started volunteering with my local Delta branch, is I really, again, a little bit older, and the field work is still where my passion is. I'm still a field biologist. But the appeal to the research, really started, siding with me. And, that's what kind of spearheaded, me going around and getting a PhD and, starting to tackle, my own research project, which is, where I am now. So I've got my first research project starting up this year, actually. So not a whole lot really to talk about as far as data or anything like that. But, Phil's a friend of mine, Dr. 𝐦𝐤𝐬𝐿, which your listeners, he's a wildlife geneticist, which, focuses on pretty much anything wildlife related, but his true passion is waterfowl. That's what he's definitely known for on the genetic side, and all his work that he's done, especially with the eastern mallards, which I'm sure we'll probably touch on a little bit here. But I've known Phil for a couple of years. I've helped him. I've volunteered my time to go travel with him and help him on some of his research projects, just to get more insight on far as what he's doing and everything like that. So yeah. Been involved in some pretty cool projects, but yeah, nothing really of mine as of yet. But here I am, kind of embarking on that, to where I established my own nonprofit, research lab, field research lab, that I'm going to start the project I'm currently working on now, and then the future projects will all run through. So
That'd be awesome. Yeah, and you mentioned Phil. He's the one that did the study on the Great Lakes mallards, correct?
yeah, so Phil and some others. Phil, I think, definitely was the one who spearheaded that whole thing. But there's been other people he's collaborated with, like Dr. Schumer and those guys that have co-authored papers and stuff. But yeah, Phil's definitely the genetics guy when it comes to the mallards. That I think really brought this to the forefront. And now he's partnered with Ducks Unlimited to do the duck DNA project and everything like that. So
Got it. Okay.
Phil's definitely the guy. Anything genetics related in the bird world, whether it's turkey, he's doing a partnership with Dr. Chamberlain for wild turkeys right now too. So anything genetics wise, Phil's got his hands in it.
Yeah. And so for that paper, that research, you probably know better than I do to give kind of a summary on it, but that was basically them looking at the mallards in the Great Lakes region and seeing like what has affected them over the years, right?
Yeah, so the Great Lakes. So a little bit of a history here, and I don't have everything memorized, so people just kind of I would direct people to go look these papers up, especially in the world of AI. You can just simply type in Dr. 𝐦𝐿𝐻𝐿 genetics mallard and peer reviewed paper, and then enjoy the content that's going to put out. It's a rabbit hole, I'll tell you. But everyone, I would assume, knows. I mean, we can touch on it if you want, on the genetics that's going on with the hybridization of these game farm mallards into the wild population along the Atlantic flyway. Well, the Great Lakes region is kind of a little bit been coined the term the new Atlantic flyway as far as that aspect goes. So if you look at our area, and you're in our area, we're in the Great Lakes region. We live close to Lake Erie. There's been quite a few papers on that. So not only Phil has his projects and stuff that he's done with Winus Point, Ben Lukanen from Michigan State, who worked with Phil on Ben's PhD project, looked at urbanization with hen mallard distribution, and also had a genetic component to it as well. So there's been a lot of research that's gone out there, but I guess kind of the kind of summary of it, if you will, is and these numbers might be off a little bit, but it gives you at least the idea. Is I think Phil put out a paper in 2020. I forget what the name of it was, but they sampled 300 birds, and I believe the birds were sampled at Winus. I'm not 100% sure on that. I know they were in that area, but I'm pretty sure it was Winus, because Brendan and his guys up there at Winus, they have a good relationship with Phil, so I'm assuming it's them. that when they sampled those 300 birds, there was about 30% of the birds sampled had, you know, relatively higher rates of hybridization of these game farm mallards. Now, I don't remember what the percentage was, what the category was for high versus, you know, not high. It could have been 2% to 20%. I can't remember, but they had this genetic game farm ancestry, you know, into those sampled birds. Fast forward to 2023, and I believe that number increased to 60%. You know, so pretty exponential, you know, increase as far as that goes in a 3-year span, you know, which is significant, right? I don't know where that is today. I would have to, you know, kind of dig into the literature a little bit more as far as that goes. I mean, Phil has not done any major sampling up there. I would have to go back to look at Ben's paper. I'm sure Ben's paper had some information on that too. But yeah, you know, so you're looking at a substantial amount of sampled populations that have this hybridization. I'm sure along the Great Lakes region, our population of mallards, if I was a betting man, you know, those numbers are probably pretty close to what you can expect when you harvest a mallard in our region. But again, you know, it's dependent on the birds themselves. You know, mallards can have more residential tendencies. Is it a migrator? You know, what is it, right? So there's been other aspects to this too, is, you know, stable isotope analysis and things like that other researchers have looked at to kind of classify, okay, now we have the genetics of this bird, but where does it come from? What region did that bird come from, right? So there's all sorts of interesting literature that's out there, you know, between, you know, Dr. Schumer and his graduate students at his lab that have looked at this. So there's been a lot. The topic has been approached from many different, you know, avenues to kind of get a, you know, the best picture that we can over what's going on with mallards in our region, because it's interesting. And I did not realize this until maybe a week ago or so. I was listening to a podcast and Dr. Cohen from Tennessee Tech was on there, who I listen to and follow his stuff too. And he had just made in passing that, you know, something that brought about the genetics and the mallards. And, you know, it's a relatively low sample size or population that he's got down there. He said less than 10% of his birds that sampled have that. Now, you couple that with what I've known from Phil, you know, Phil telling me that, you know, the telemetry studies show that these birds that have higher ancestry of these game farm genetics, they don't migrate any further south than the northern Tennessee wall. It's kind of like a wall. They just can't sustain that migration that far south. You know, there's a lot of reasons because of it. You know, those higher hybridization rates, you know, at about 25%, 25%, if I remember right, I was just talking to Phil about it, is where you start seeing, you know, negative ecological, you know, effects, you know, as a result of that hybridization. And one of those is, you know, this weaker migration. These birds don't have any fat. If you find a bird that's got higher hybridization rates and just game farm mallards in general, there's no fat on those birds when you open them up. They're not designed to do that, right? They weren't bred for that. They weren't artificially selected for that in Europe, in the European, you know, population of birds that were brought over. So if you don't have fat, you don't have energy storage, you don't have excess energy for, you know, utilization of, you know, cellular processes and things like that to travel and sustain that migration. And then you couple that with how much wetland resources and things that we've lost over the years. You know, those birds and they're not really, they're hybrids. They're you know, higher game farms. They're dumb, right? They're more like, you know, farm ducks and chickens, man. They like the urban areas and they don't travel very far. And Phil kind of calls it like these excursions or these walks, if you will, when you're looking at the telemetry data, where they just kind of all over the place. You don't see this northern southern migration on these birds that have higher hybridization. So there's a lot of intriguing things about it that I can see, you know, continuing to be studied at different aspects. You know, obviously Ben looking at urbanization and how do stormwater ponds, retention ponds, constructed stormwater wetlands that are being used in these high urbanized areas that treat stormwater management for EPA regulations and things like that. Well, you're putting water on the urban landscape. And I can tell you from my own experience, how many times I kick up mallards in at least a half dozen to a dozen birds on a small detention pond out of the cattails. Just walking around and doing my investigations for these features, and then all of a sudden, boom, these birds pop up, and you're like, oh, like it's just surprising because there's not much there, but there's a half a dozen to a dozen birds, depending. And you're like, well, what the hell are they here for? And it's looking around, it's sanctuary, it's cover. I mean, if you think about it, these detention ponds act as a little bit like a miniature, moist soil unit. It's these detention ponds have to be drawn down after 72 hours, so they're wet for 72 hours, and they should be dry. So you've got this fluctuating, table of water inundation, so you can have grasses and things like that pop in and certain things too. So makes sense. I don't know how much of that's actually been studied, but I can see that being an aspect of future research for sure.
Well, and like that also goes to a common sense thing too. I mean, like you start to look at what these birds want. They want, like you said, sanctuary. They want to be. They need water, they need food, and they need shelter or safety. So like if you're looking at, I'm a process engineer, so I understand a lot about the, retention ponds and stormwater runoff and things like that. I've had to do it plenty for projects. And so like I see it too, because I'll show up at a plant and we'll be looking at, runoff areas or building, areas for water runoff at these plants. And yeah, most of them have cattails. They have grass that's growing there, and that's mostly in that portion of it for the infrastructure of it to keep the soil from eroding. And so then it's like you've got that's there. You've got the urbanization aspect of it, even with geese. Like they're looking for some place that they not only do these retention ponds and hot water discharges and stuff keep the water open all year long, but gives them that water that they need. So it's like, you hear the hot pond thing or the heated pond thing, and it's like some of these people really think that they're putting like hot water or like heated coils in their ponds to like keep them open. I'm like, you don't understand the amount of money that goes into a manufacturing facility that is heating this water. That's just a byproduct of their process.
Yeah. So the thing to think about is all species of wildlife, they need three things. You learn this in undergrad, right? They need food. So how do I find food? How do I avoid becoming food? And how do I reproduce and make a copy of myself? That's it. That's the framework. If you look at early humans, that was the framework, right? Survival, reproduction, growing the population, right? Obviously, modern humans and society has changed that, right? But still, for the most part, we go to work to make money so we can buy food, feed our family, right? Have a house, that kind of thing. So a little different context, but for wildlife goes and for ducks especially, those three things. So if you have food, great. If you have cover, even better, because most of the time, cover is your limiting factor versus food. Right? Whether you're talking about deer, you're talking about turkey, you're talking about ducks. Cover, cover, cover. Sanctuary, 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 right? They need that protection, right? Food across our landscape is generally not a problem, which is where the flooded corn comes into as well. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit, but the food aspect is obviously important, but almost the same. Maybe there's an argument, depending, a little bit more important is the sanctuary and the cover aspect, as well, that a lot of people underlook, or maybe not underlook, but overlook probably is a little bit more of a correct way to look at it.
It gets underappreciated.
Exactly. Yeah. And then obviously the reproductive aspect, you're not going to be able to reproduce if you don't have the first two. Right. So, yeah. So whether you're talking about, the prairies in northern Canada, the prairie pothole region, you're talking about an urbanized area, talking about flooded corn, whatever it is. I mean, if you have an area and wildlife find an area that satisfy their ecological needs, why would they leave? There's no reason for it. It's they don't have the sense of, oh, I'm here, I need to move south. I mean, if you're a duck in, ancient times, whatever, before society, before urbanization and man really did the thing. You think ducks are breeding in the northern latitudes, right? Let's just say Prairie Canada, right, where they breed. Well, if you think of what it was like in the past, where winters were much harsher than they are now, right? Of those birds, just they had to move, and then they would move and they would fly to what's now Michigan, Wisconsin, whatever. Guess what? It was frozen. Guess what? It was cold. Well, okay, maybe I can stop here for a little bit, and that line was just further south to where they could. Okay, thank God. Here's some open water. Here's all my friends. Like, here's resources. Okay, I can breathe a little bit, man. Like, I'm down to skin and bones here. I need some food, type of thing. So that line was much further south than what it was. And that's just basic ecology. I mean, animals are they're gonna go and inhabit an area that meets their needs, and they'll go to areas and get pushed to areas once they don't meet their needs, right? And some species migrate. Birds migrate. There are species of mammals that have the great migration, right, for those reasons. So yeah, so that it's not rocket science. It's animals are going to go where the resources are available. And what we're seeing now is those resources are becoming more predominantly available in the northern latitudes, more so than they did a decade, 2 decades, ago. It's just not an argument, and if people do, it's like, well, I can't continue this conversation with you because, it's just like, where do we go from here? Like, you're just not going to take in the information of what's really going on.
I mean, that's most conversations these days, or arguments, is that, people get so stuck on one thing and they just beat it home. And that's been this flooded corn discussion is we don't have, I mean, like, you might find a property here and there up here that has flooded corn, but it's like, it's not miles or hundreds of miles of flooded corn.
No.
Like, it's,
we
don't have.
I can't tell you in Northeast Ohio where I have ever seen flooded corn. I'm sure there's probably some small pockets that do it, but statistically, it's such a small area. I just haven't seen it, and I'm sure people do it, I'm sure, it's, yeah.
But I mean, the comparing, the size of, maybe there is a 20-acre area that somebody floods their corn, but you're talking about Lake Erie.
Yeah.
We got 5 Great Lakes here in Lake St. Clair, all these tributaries, everything, all this sanctuary that you're talking about. They don't need to go any further south if they don't have a watch or a calendar that says, oh, well, it's November 14th. I have to get out of here and go south. It's like, that's not their driving factor. It's not that they're looking at, they're looking at the resource that's available to them. If they've got open water and if they've got food, why would they go any further south?
Yeah, and we can dissect this, I guess. That's what we're here for, right? So when you're talking about habitat, all right, let's talk about, beneficial habitat for waterfowl. Moist soil units are king for the most part. I mean, if you look at like a food pyramid or food chart for waterfowl, I mean, invertebrates, small grain seeds, grass seeds, those kind of things, that diversity in the diet, that's what they need, right? You need higher amounts of protein during the growing season. We call it the growing season because things are growing, right? So if it's a deer fawn, right, you need protein for body mass and body size and just body development, right? It's the same thing for ducks. You got your brood that hatches. They've got to grow to be able to sustain flight for the fall flight so they can migrate as well. So the protein sources during the growing season, I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? These moist soil units in the springtime, areas get flooded. That's why water is so important. We talk about the drought, right? The prairies are dry, right? For duck production, these duck factories, right? That's an issue, right? Because you need those water for other aspects of the life cycle. But, that's the protein is a massive driving force. And you get into the fall and the winter, they've already grown to their size for what they need. And, now they're switching in carbohydrates. The energy demand is a lot more important, right? And you look at corn, and it's a high carbohydrate, food. And if you spend all year, and ducks can put on fat pretty quickly, within a couple weeks, so in a high quality area. So you got a duck that's, got a fat reserve stored up, and hey, if I've got a food source that is immediate energy, so carbohydrates get converted into glucose into the body, and stored as excess glycogen in your muscles. It's one of those where it's immediate energy, and if you have a fat reserve buildup, you don't have to pull from your pantry. You have immediate food sources, which what makes flooded corn, such an attractable, high energy, resource for these birds. Which, listen, I'm going to caveat all this by saying, I feel for people in the South. I do. I feel for you. I think that the flooded corn thing is an amplifier to a much larger problem. And I think the flooded corn issue should not be something that we are standing at the mountaintop screaming about, when there's a lot of other things that are more important that are causing duck declines that we should be screaming about. I don't see anybody reaching out to their state representatives on the proposed, federal change to water resource protection for wetlands. Who even knows that's happening? Because if that passes, you are going to make it significantly easier to drain these seasonally inundated wetlands, from the landscape. It's going to remove protections from a lot of others. And overall, waterfowl are going to suffer even more. And you're going to lose even more habitat.
Yeah, the amount of habitat that we lose compared to the amount of habitat that we're building.
And it's a world I live in. I mean, I've got 6 projects I'm looking at today for EPA and Army Corps of Engineer, permits for water resources and stuff. Like, it's what I deal with. This is an issue. No one's talking about it. Where is it talking about, how, the state of our refuges are in? I feel for state agencies. I feel for federal agencies for sure. I'm sympathetic, but there's a lot of these refuges that don't have very robust staff. The maintenance is backlogged, and these areas are becoming increasingly less productive than they once were because of it, because of funding, because of staffing, whatever it is. They're all very valid, issues to also bring up. But what it's summarizing here is that this is a very diverse and problematic situation that does not have one solution. There's a lot of aspects here. These moist soil units, this flooded corn, these refuges, whatever it is. I mean, think about what happens if, in the wild chance, flooded corn ever gets banned. What do you think is going to happen? Well, these people already have levied areas to flood the corn. They have the money to do it, so they just build moist soil units. So what do you think is going to happen, from this? Yeah, it's a legitimate question. I understand what you're asking. I understand the problem that you're facing and what you're seeing, and I'm sympathetic of it. But the realization is, what do you think it's going to change? Maybe there's an argument there that could be. It's not an area where I live. I don't focus on it that much. But I look at it that if I was an outfitter, which is what I see people complaining about, and I am a popular outfitter and I have sustained, clientele and money, well, guess what? I'm just going to, I can build moist soil units. That's legal. And I can plant it with native species of grasses and, things like that are, or just manage the existing seed bank that's there and promote native vegetation, in these moist soil units that are benefit for ducks. And you put large scale water out there with these resources. You think the birds aren't going to go there? They've already got a site fecundity for that corn area, if you will. They're going to come back and go, oh, look at this. Still the same thing. So it's just a legitimate question, that I would ask. So again, here's us standing on this mountain, screaming about this, which I'm glad people are standing up and, pushing for a change. But I think that change, not saying it shouldn't be directed to this, not saying that. I just think there also needs to be a tandem, screaming of these other issues, and getting those represented as well, and people getting educated on what's going on in the background that you don't hear about.
Right. Well, and I have seen it in some of the conversation that people, they'll say, yeah, flooded corn is an issue, but have you looked at the state of our refuges? Have you looked at the state of our public lands? And it's like you said, the resources are minimal compared to the amount of land that needs to be managed. And funding is also an issue too, because they would rather spend their money, developing something in those wetland areas than restoring.
Yeah, and listen, there's again, funding. Like I was just at the Ohio Wildlife Management Conference last week, and they were talking about, I think it was the 24 or 25 numbers. I can't remember what it was, but the hunting licenses that were sold were around 350,000 or something like that. And then also they had on there the amount of the Ohio wetland stamps that were sold also, which those are $10. They're nothing, right? But only 40 or 41,000 were sold. So you're talking $400,000 for 1 year of sales. I got news for you. So I work with, again, I'm a wetland ecologist also. I work with a lot of nonprofits that build and restore, these wetland mitigation sites. $400,000 is not going a long way. It's not, so I look at those numbers and I say, okay, what's going on here? Are people just fed up with duck hunting in Ohio, which most of us would agree is not a very good state to duck hunt? I mean, we still do it, now, unless you live up north by Ottawa or something like that, where you've got good areas, but they get pounded. Pressure is a whole nother conversation, so we have some good areas, but they get just pounded. The birds are like, I'm out, type of thing. That's a whole different conversation. But, I look at those numbers and I say, are people, just not duck hunting because they're fed up with it because of public access, and it's not managed. It's just not, the resources and what it should be, which brings more hunters congregated into closer areas because that's where the birds are, rather than big and spread out over these systems where you can have hunters that spread out, move birds around, and you're not on top of each other, getting into fights. And, do people just not want to deal with that? It's a different generation. I mean, you see the flat bill mafia of the duck hunters that are in, which, I mean, the younger kids, it's great that they're getting into it, but it's a different culture, so what is it? Is it all of it? Probably is. Most of the things in wildlife science are not directed at one solution for the problem. It's multiple, so I think there's a lot of things. Or is it people are like, listen, when it comes to duck season, I try to juggle duck season and deer season and, family life. And, in reality, I get maybe 5, maybe 10 really good duck hunting days a year. Man, I'm just going to go to Illinois, or I'm going to go, me and a couple buddies are going to go down to a guide in Kansas or whatever. And we're going to go down there for 3 or 4 days. We're going to split the cost and get 4 or 5 days of really good duck hunting in, come back home with birds and focus on deer hunting. I don't know.
Plenty of times.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's where my mind goes to it. So the states, they have their issues ahead of them as well. Yeah, I mean, they're not innocent in it either, but I also sympathize with them too. They've got a challenging task, which is why, I mean, I could never do it. I don't envy them at all. I respect them like crazy. And I know, a lot of them all across, I know quite a few, especially for all across the country. Guy in particular is a buddy of mine. He used to work for the federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And I mean, he's one of the most brilliant waterfowl field ecologists I've ever met, and it's, you listen to him talk and so I have some insight as far as how things are done and what to focus on. And it's good, but it's bureaucratic, it's political, and a lot of times the representation of the biologist is not projected at the state level, and they're the ones that get the blame, type of thing. The biologists know what they're talking about. No, they do. It's just, they're in a lot of ways handcuffed, for whatever reason. So, yeah, that's kind of, I forget where we were really going with that, but
the funding part of it is like I feel like that's a stranglehold within the government, because if you look at the overall population and how many people are buying hunting licenses, it's what, a percent?
Yeah. Oh, you mean, yeah, from Ohio?
I mean, just everywhere.
Yeah.
The whole population of the United States. It's like nobody's going to be looking at the 0.5% of people that are, screaming about something, when you've got people lobbying for taxes and all this other stuff that goes into like the infrastructure of
Society.
roads and yeah, just everything. Like
I think it's overshadowed for sure.
Yeah, it just is. For us, it's something that we look at because it's something we're passionate about, that we care about. But us screaming about it doesn't do anything. You know, it's a bigger picture in our world than it is in your neighborhood.
Yeah, and and it goes down to it too. I mean, you look at like the whole Kennedy letter. I kind of question how much he really cares about it, or if it's more of a political thing. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know the man, but it's, hey, like, this has been going on for a while. Why are you just now bringing it up? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, and really,
going on for 30 years.
What do you expect is going to happen? I mean, listen, the real change happens in all reality. And this is my opinion. The real change happens with volunteers and nonprofits. I mean, I see people trashing Delta. I see people trashing Ducks Unlimited. You want me to pull up the numbers of acreages that Delta or Ducks Unlimited has built high quality wetlands across the landscape? I mean, you're talking thousands of acres, of wetland habitat. What have you done? Like what have you done? Delta, they have a mission for 1 million ducks a year into the flyway, right? And they focus on their henhouse program, which part of my research project. And so, like, what have you done? Now, are they perfect? No organization's perfect, but hey, man, like, are you a member? Have you, look at all the acreages that they've restored and put together. I mean, it's $35, you haven't, then shut up. I don't want to hear from you. Like, it's the same thing in the deer world. Like, you look at the state, right? But no matter what it is, the state owns in Ohio like 4% of the land base. What do you think they're going to do with 4% of anything? So there's resources out there for you as a landowner, as a farmer. If you want to restore wetlands on your property, there's funding out there for you. Go get it.
H2 Ohio.
H2 Ohio, you have NACA funds that you can apply for. It's a match program. There's other things out there, but I don't see you doing it. So
that was another argument that I was making, like you said earlier in this, I have no hand. The flooded corn thing does not affect me. If you ban it, fine. I don't care. I have no stake in it. But when you look at like the big picture, these people that have hundreds of acres that they're turning into a wetland, they're creating habitat. So if you want to get mad at them for creating habitat and also attracting birds, that's fine. But like you said, like there's only so much that people are willing to do. But if you're not doing anything, you're not contributing to the overall welfare of these birds at all.
I mean, even this is going to fizzle. This is going to fizzle out. It's just the hot topic. I'm sure there's going to be a movement to continue it, but you're not going to see it spread on social media like it has been over the past 2 weeks. But I will say, again, I'm in the same boat as you. It doesn't affect me. But I think it's a slippery slope. I don't know if it's wrong to have that view, but at the same time, like, I look at it as an ecologist. I think you're in two camps. Me and Brian talked about this yesterday. And as a hunter, as an outdoorsman, particularly as an ecologist like myself, you're in two camps. You're either in the camp of the resource, or you're in the selfish camp of your own success. Like, you're in one of those two things. Like, all you really care about is having a successful harvest in the sea. Like, you care more about your pond your area and shooting ducks than you care about anybody else. If you're down south, I don't care what the guys in Ohio are doing. In Ohio, we don't care what the guys in Louisiana are doing. I think that's a little bit of a slippery slope. And I think people, and it's not going to be not everyone's going to do this, but especially as an ecologist, my objective is the resource. It's that simple. So, if you look at, this whole flooded corn issue, well, no matter where these birds are short-stopped, if it's flooded corn, let's say that it gets banned and they create moist soil units in those areas, because I guarantee you they probably will. They're not going to be like, oh, I'm going to close this guide service down. You guys won. No, you're going to piss them off even more. And then you might, you know what I'm saying? So whatever, that's a different point. But the concept is that, hey, you're sending birds back up north healthy. They don't have to travel as far. They're not as energetically, exhausted. They're going back north. Where the focus should be is the breeding grounds. That's where the biggest loss of the population is. It's on the breeding grounds. Hen survival in the breeding ground is not good because of all these other issues, poor habitat, predation, all these different types of things. That's where your goal should be, because if your goal and your focus is on conserving the resource, you are going to be able to hunt. You're going to be able to have those opportunities. You're not going to have decreased bag limits and all these other types of things. Again, it sucks. If you're in the southern, part of the United States with the flyways, the weather is changing, and that weather severity line, which I don't know how familiar you are with the weather severity index that like the Schumer and his guys have put together on, Dr. Schumer on the Foul Weather podcast. It's an algorithm that they're looking at snow and temperature and ice and this weather severity line, and it is accurate. It's something I've paid more attention to over the last couple of years, following him, and that line is shifting. Whether you want to believe it or not, it is, so this is something that I think it's the new norm, and in conservation, I think a lot of times we get caught up in, we were talking about this at the conference, some of the guys, I heard a presenter talking about it too, which stemmed the conversation was, we get kind of caught up in, all these other things, but sometimes we just get lost in the fact that this is the new norm. And we just have to self-correct. And how do we move from here? We're not able to fix it from here. Like from this point on, this is the new norm. How do we start mitigating the new norm, right? How do we start mitigating this fluctuation in this migratory line, this weather, severity line, the migration, this shifting, migratory line, the shortstop line, whatever you want to call it. This is the new norm. How do we fix it? Is where we go. I'm done pointing fingers. Again, this is going to happen. It's flooded corn is going to happen. The building and construction of moist soil units is going to happen. The building and construction of mitigation sites like we have here in Ohio with like the Stream and Wetland Foundation, that's going to happen because when you build commercial buildings and stuff like that and you damage wetland resources, you have to offset those impacts. You look through Ohio, it's riddled with those sites. And I have research sites on them. There's birds everywhere. You think those birds can't survive there for longer? It was 50 some degrees a couple weeks ago. Those birds are here. They're hanging out. I go by there almost every day and I see birds. Now it's locked up, so birds are pushed around, and some of them probably moved out. But it's late January. Those birds aren't going to like, hey, I'm going to go down to Louisiana for a couple weeks and then just fly back north again. Like they're just going to go south. They're going to find another warmer pocket and they're going to hang out there, and then they're going to migrate back north. So no matter what it is in the South, if I was a betting man, no matter what you try to accomplish, you are going to have issues. It's just the new norm with weather patterns, with, all the different types of things with how habitat's being done now. and Ducks Unlimited building resources, these state mitigation programs where you're building resources, especially if the proposed water rule changes now. It's just, this is a complex problem that it needs to be attacked from multiple aspects. But I think people need to realize that it's just changing. It's changing for us too. I mean, look at our season dates. It's like North Zone's over, and there's a ton of birds coming in. From now. Like I see a new influx of birds that are just coming down. And it's like our season's over. And yeah, don't get me started on that. But it's you know what I'm saying. Like, I mean, we have to deal with it too. Like, we have birds here, and we can't hunt them. Unless
Well,
unless
it's
you're the
like you
South
said,
Zone.
it's the new norm is Mother Nature.
Yeah.
We can't change Mother Nature. We can change the variables that are affected from Mother Nature, but that's what we have to start to look at mitigating, is what we do now that we have been forced, our hands been forced by Mother Nature. We don't change the weather up here because we can.
Yeah. I mean, listen, like I said, I feel for 'em, man. It sucks. I don't like reading it, and obviously, it happens, but it's shed more light onto it. And I know there's been research on it too. I mean, Dr. Cohen and others have looked at this on their telemetry studies. I see people, floating his research papers around, and they've been putting some posts out during this whole thing. There's been other researchers where they've tried to attempt to, look at the other food availability, resources in those flooded corn. Is there something else here going on? But it kind of underlines the whole cover thing. I seen a aerial footage of drone footage maybe a week or so ago. It was flooded corn. There wasn't a piece of corn on the field, but there were still thousands of birds. Why? There's shallow water. There's plenty of cover. Those birds are just hunkered up and moving and navigating in and around those stalks, and it's that or a wide open field where they're just not as comfortable there, type of thing. So, like I said, I feel for them, I really do, but I just think, not to say that you shouldn't be talking about this, but you should absolutely be talking about the other bigger picture issues that are having much more of a negative impact on waterfowl populations than flooded corn.
I think it's just bringing that to people's attention too, so that they're not so stuck on, oh, we really need to ban flooded corn. It's like, well, you could also just look at the other, like you said, donating to Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl, so that you're at least giving back to the resource in some capacity, or looking at how you change your property, or however you can help, as opposed to just complaining about one thing that's not the actual overarching problem.
Yeah, well, it's an emotional response too. I mean, it's an emotional response. It's rage baiting. It's clickbaiting. That it's the social media game. I mean, and I mean, if I lived in the South, and it's a bigger culture down there. Duck hunting is ingrained culture down there, and when that culture starts getting affected, you're going to have more of an emotional response from a wider group of people than anybody else. People in Missouri or Kansas are like, yeah, so what? Like, what's the big deal, right? And so it's just, you can understand and appreciate that, but at the same time, you don't hear about these other issues because there's not that emotional attachment to it. They don't even know what the EPA rules are on wetland resource protection. They don't know what the 404 program is. They don't know about the Sackett ruling back in 23 from the Supreme Court. They don't know what significant nexus test was, for wetland resources and identification. Like, they don't know the history of these things. They don't probably know, the history of, large scale monocrop agriculture, and the relevance of draining off these wetland resources and headwater resource protection. They don't know, and a lot of them don't care. Like, if you do a presentation on that stuff versus flooded corn, you'd be like, oh my God, look at the great swamp that used to be in western Ohio through Indiana and stuff. State tree out there is a telephone pole and corn stalks. Like, there's no swamp there anymore. So, like, but if you showed people that, that they'd be like, oh my God, or not. And if they weren't, then you're like, you're not my demographic. Like, there's nothing that I can do that you're ever going to change anything. I think that's a fewer percent, a much statistically significant group of people than the latter. I think most people that are hunters are in it for the resource. It's just the social media, man, the clickbaiting, the rage baiting. It just gets the direction steered from into one direction from an emotional response, and it just overshadows the other issues that are going on.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, you're doing research on the hen houses and the reproduction. What are you seeing as like big changes that are affecting that?
Well, right now, I mean, the biggest thing that I see is not a lot of quality upland nesting, natural nesting sites for mallards. And this goes back to the management of, whether it's state land or whatever, right? So it's few and far between. There's more there than what we probably think. But this year we're going to start using thermal drones to really identify, these naturally nesting, mallards, and particularly in relation to these mitigation sites like Stream and Wetland Foundation and those do. I work with those guys, and they're biologists. They're a great organization, and they've got it down, man. I'll tell you, you go to any one of their sites and they are loaded with birds. And natural nest sites, I mean, the one in Columbus, I forget the name of the mitigation site, but I mean, without even trying, we found 6 to 8, natural nests out there, with clutches of 10. So you're talking 60 to 80 potential birds just there. And we weren't even trying to find them, so, you look at those areas and they've got it down, right? So I would say the thing that I've seen, just doing this hen house program is we have a higher utilization rate of hen houses compared to others that I've talked to. Now, this isn't something that I've really seen in published literature because the hen houses, they've been studied, but it's not as deep into the literature as you would think. Even on the Delta side, Delta's been doing it for decades, right? And there's been, research on it, but it's not this vast database of research. So there's some holes there on things that we could strengthen in our knowledge in our data sets. But we have a relatively high utilization. Our utilization rate is about 65% of tubes produce a successful hatch throughout the year, which is high. That also has led me to go down this path on my research project. Knowing Phil and understanding what he's doing with the genetics of the mallards, especially in the Great Lakes region. Okay. And we're seeing this change, understanding the changes in the ecology, the natural ecology of the bird, how they nest, how they migrate, all these different types of things, predator avoidance, right? You're telling me these birds are becoming more farm duck-like or more, chicken-like. My sister's got a small farm. She's got farm ducks. She's got chickens. And in my head, I'm like, where do they nest? They nest in these boxes that we build them. So I'm telling you, you're telling me in that exponential increase from 30 to 60% in a 3-year span, this genetic issue that's going on, and we have this higher utilization rate of our tubes, right? I'm like, all right, has anybody looked at these hen houses and the influence they may have across the landscape? And I think they're a great tool. I think the hen houses, I mean, just our group alone, we have about 70 hen houses across Northeast Ohio. And I mean, we've hatched by this point in the last 8 years of doing it, that Jeff has been spearheading this project. I've only been involved in it for 2 years since I started volunteering with them. I mean, probably put thousands of birds out, just our little program alone. Right. So they're a amazing tool. The question is, in areas of high prevalence of hybridization of these hybrid, game farm and wild birds, is there any statistical correlation that we may be causing and allowing genetic introgression to succeed by having these resources out there. If you've got a bird that has a higher hybridization rate and a lower prevalence of successful nesting, well, we just gave them an artificial nest out on the open water that they can be successful. Right now, we don't know if that's an issue, because I know Phil's still looking at, different generations. Does this start to dissipate out to F3, F4 generation of lineages in those birds? That's still being studied. So maybe it's not a problem, but it hasn't been looked at. So the first stage is, okay, we have this high utilization rate. Let's get the birds in hand. Let's sample the birds. Let's look at the genetics and say, hey, you know what? Man, 80% of these birds are wild mallards. Okay, well, what does that tell us? We've got to do a better job of managing these marshlands for natural upland nesting sites, because it's few and far between, and they're selecting for these, right? So does that mean we take them away? Does that mean we keep them in conjunction with natural? So you see where I'm going. There's all sorts of questions that can come from this, but you've got to start somewhere, and no one's really looked at this. So like Phil, I've been a field biologist for 20 years. So my interests directly relate to field applications. And this is a tool that I believe in. This is a tool that I use and a tool that I'll continue to use. You just got to start somewhere, and have a baseline data. Hey, in our small region in Northeast Ohio, out of these, we'll grow the tube number. Right now we're at 70, and we'll get to a much larger sample size, especially as we start getting more partners, but out of, 200 birds sampled, 30% have a hybridization rate of 20 or less percent or less. Okay. That tells us one thing. Or 80% of the birds have hybridization rate of 20% or less, right? That tells us a lot of things too. It's all speculation at this point. And until we dig into getting the numbers and everything like that, is where we'll start really being able to look at this. But it's not anything we're going to really be able to analyze for years on out before, we really even with this project, it's going to be a small scale. It's not going to prove anything. It's just going to, have biological, persuasion, or plausibility, sorry. Is it biologically plausible that this could be causing an issue? Possibly, right? Let's look a little bit further. What was our limitations before? We've got these partners now with more funding. Now we can do this. Now we can, incorporate.
Scale.
Yeah, now we can scale up to larger sample size. We can do, isotope analysis. We can use, all these different types of things to really hone in, more so. So everything's got to start somewhere. So we're gonna start here, and having guys like Phil to work with and others, that we're collaborating with is gonna just, lead us down this path of hopefully, the rest of my career being able to study this kind of stuff. So
that's so cool. I mean, it's interesting to hear that and just like see what you're doing. I mean, it's just, I've seen it from afar.
Yeah, well, and it's a thing too. Like, listen, it's not my full-time job, and it's okay. It's why when I see people, complain and everything online, and I just always ask, what have you done? I mean, my wife and kids probably get annoyed that on a free weekend I'm out there. It doesn't take up a ton of time, but like, I'm always doing it. Like I'm 42 years old. I've got a wife. I've got kids. I've got kids that are active in high school, active in sports. I'm the high school softball coach. I have a full-time job, obligations here. I'm volunteering with Ducks Unlimited, our local chapter, as well as our Delta chapter, doing my own research project, collaborating, volunteering to go with Phil to Arizona or wherever to do projects. Like, what are you doing? Now, I'm not saying everyone's got to do that, but if you're going to use your fingers to talk shit online or just, spew nonsense, like, that's my question.
That's something to back it up.
That's my question. Yeah. Yeah. Whether or not what I'm doing means anything, we're putting thousands of birds in the landscape. I can tell you that much, now. Yeah. So coming on board the program that Jeff has had, he's kept notes and records, but nothing crazy. Me turning this into a project is going to give us like concrete data to say, hey,
Jeff's done it for the love of the game.
Exactly, 100%. And he still does it. He'll do it until his body failed. So it's yeah, but now it's, hey man, you're putting all this work in and we're putting this work in. Let's put some numbers to it and put some, uh, information out there on what we're doing. But
Yeah, well, and that could also influence other people to start doing the same thing if the success rate of it is high.
yeah,
If there's positive influence on the population from this, then that increases the amount of people that'll be potentially doing the same thing.
yeah, and that's the thing too. I mean, my working hypothesis is that statistically, it's not going to be of significance to say, hey, we shouldn't use these in this area. But again, the birds that I get in hand and sample is going to add to Phil's, database of his genetic database of Great Lakes mallards. You start adding, isotope analysis. Is this bird coming more from a residential lineage, or is it coming from more of a migratory lineage? If it's more of a general, well, now you start looking at the commercial propagation of these birds, for hunting preserves, and I know of a couple that raise game farm mallards to release onto their small pond for people to come hunt and shoot, like a pheasant hunt, right? But those birds escape, right? Type of thing. So, yeah, there's a whole nother conversation on how to fix a problem. I don't have an answer for that. I don't think really people do yet. But you also need more data, right? Phil's sample size of 300 birds for his one paper, whatever my sample size is, Ben's sample size, Dr. Schumer, Dr. Cohen, their sample size, any of the other big researchers that work at these big universities that do far more research, anything that I'll ever do. I mean, those guys are the industry experts, but even those sample sizes are few and far between compared to, again, it's biological. You say, hey, it is highly inferred that this X equals Y, but we're nowhere near being able to confidently scientifically say this is causing, an issue. It could be, it's a contributing amplifying factor over a, umbrella of things, but I don't think the genetics of the mallard population is what's causing the overall, northern shift of the migration, line. But I think you're naive to say it's not a contributing factor for sure.
Of course, yeah. Well, and I think, with people, like you mentioned, all of them and you yourself doing this work, we're further ahead than we were 5 years ago. We're further ahead than we were 20 years ago. It's like anything else that you do in the world. The more you research and the more you understand these topics, the better you can, manage the variables moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. So what it comes down to, it's just scientific literature, man. It's just a piece of the puzzle. This person is shaping this piece for that puzzle, and this piece, and this piece, and this piece. Sometimes they all fit together nicely, and sometimes they don't quite fit, and things got to get changed, and new researchers come in and say, hey, I'm going to take this research that was done, and they had these limitations, and we're going to do this because we have these resources, and it can help, shed light on this. Like that's just the world, and that's why, keeping the integrity of the literature is important. People that, aren't researchers or aren't biologists or academics, if, not to say you can't talk about, I want you reading articles. You see, who Phil puts out a paper, right? And it's like, okay, we live in an age of AI now, man. It ain't going anywhere. So we get better. You could go on ChatGPT right now and say, Dr. Phil Lavretsky, genetics, mallard, peer-reviewed articles, enter. And it's going to give you, damn near all of his papers. Okay, now give me a one-paragraph summary as a non-biologist, not really understanding it. What is this paper studying, and how does it relate to me, right? Or anything. And you can start educating yourself on the scientific literature more so than you ever could. I mean, even when I read these papers, some of them are hard to read, man. They're hard to digest. It's almost like sometimes it's a competition on how hard, like how hard do you have to really make this, type of thing, but still, I mean, I see people posting now this flooded corn thing about studies and, look at what this study proved. Well, that study didn't prove anything. That study's showing a statistical correlation that's biologically plausible, but we're falling down a steep slope here when you say it's proving, because now what you are doing is what most people hate, is when people cherry pick data from research to fit your agenda.
Yes.
That's where it becomes a problem. So it's one of those, before you post, maybe use the old ChatGPT or whatever on your phone to be like, hey, am I going to sound like an idiot, doing this? Or, what's the flaws in my logic here or whatever, I mean, yeah, it's just looking at papers, and you should always ask questions about papers. I read a paper, and I look at data sets and how the data was collected. What's the issue here? Is it more of a hunter harvest model or band recovery data, or is it telemetry, based movement spatial data, which obviously is going to have more of an influence on the data and the overall result than, band recovery, hunter harvest. So just understanding, those things, and reading the paper, what were the limitations, what was the findings, what was the hypothesis. That's what I look at as a scientist. But this doesn't mean you can't do it either. Now you have tools that can help break those things down, and you can just ask those questions in layman's terms, and get the information that you need to make an informed decision, and have your own, position on the issue.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is that understanding it so that the position that you take is actually right. And now we have the tools to do that. And that's a good thing for it's a good recommendation for anybody that's listening to this, to go look at those and then also process it in a way that you understand it. So on that, I will say I appreciate you coming
Hey man, no
on
problem. Yeah.
and talking through all that, because there's stuff that you mentioned that I haven't looked at. And like you said, I looked at Phil's study. I'm not a biologist to actually, take in everything that it was about, but I understood the points of it. And, I've it's helped me kind of change my not my perspective, but like understand my position as like what's happening around here, or like, being able to kind of come up to my own conclusion and stand
Yeah, and
behind it.
that's what it is you're sympathetic, and you have understanding of the issues. Flooded corn, moist soil unit, refuges, state marshes, genetics,
Right.
funding, licenses, and you're like, holy hell, man! Like, you start brainstorming this, you're like, okay, wait a minute here, and then you start researching, what's this genetics thing, right? And you start going down, and that's where the papers get hard. You start reading about genomic techniques, and all the dorky stuff that Phil's going to put out there with all the different acronyms and everything. You're like, I'm lost. Like your ADHD brain kicks over, and you're like, I can't do it, and then you see the social media. So it's just 100%. I would just encourage people in closing, just to, when you're talking about the conservation of a species that you're interested in this case, ducks, um, you have to have an open mind and an understanding of all of the issues that are surrounding the effect that you're seeing. And you don't need to be an expert in it, but you have to have an understanding of what those issues are. Like you said, look into it a little bit, formulate your own opinion on it, and just come up with your own perspective on it, and what is it that I can do to help. I don't have a bunch of time, and honestly, I'm not interested in volunteering that much, but I'll donate $35 to Ducks Unlimited. I'll go to the banquet.
Do
I'll try
something.
to win a gun. That's fine. Yeah, it is literally that simple. It's literally that simple. And like Delta Waterfowl, one of the things, with their membership too, their magazine, you see up on the thing right here that they put together for this art thing, dude, their magazine's phenomenal. If you're a duck hunter, I mean, every single issue, like, in the amount of information that gets put out there, like, everybody would enjoy. If you're a duck hunter, you absolutely would enjoy to read that for $35. That's your coffee for the week. Like, you know what I mean? Like, well, probably 2 days, depending on where you go. If you're my daughter, it's like $12 a drink. But anyway, yeah, I'd close in that. So
Well, let anybody know where they can find you. I know you're going to be coming up with another
Yeah,
podcast.
so
So
we're gonna be doing our own podcast. We're gonna start back up. I used to have a podcast before, but we're gonna focus specifically on waterfowl and the science. I've got a lot of friends that are researchers and academics, and obviously we'll be getting the hunting side as well. It's called the Feathered Skies Podcast. I do have an Instagram account associated with it, as well as a Facebook account right now. It's active, but I am not actively posting because we're in the process of filming content and get everything set up. So once we start issuing content, things like that, we'll start being more active on there for sure. But you can go check those out. My lab, Lance Ecology Lab, is the website. You can just type that into Google and kind of see what we've got going on right there. It's not a whole lot in terms of all these projects we have going on because it's just a small field ecology lab that I can use to run my research. And if you want to get involved, I mean, there's links on there that you can look at, donation links if you want to support us or anything like that. But I'd say those ways are probably the best way to get a hold of me if you want to ask questions or reach out to me or anything like that. So,
and I'll have that linked in the description too, so anybody can find it easy. But thanks again, Eric, for coming on and talking about all this. It's always super interesting stuff to hear about, and we'll have to have you back on and talk about some
yeah,
more.
sure, man. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.